Hello, hello. This is Pattyjo. How are you this morning? I am just trying to get things all ready. This is where we left off yesterday. I haven't read all these comments yet, but okay. John, Opera told him about the grounds thing. He's been told several times, the court and Opera, and he doesn't care to listen. Him being dumb doesn't help either. He really cherry picks what he wants to hear, doesn't he? Okay, Miss Ruby. He has went over his few questions. Yeah, like 4 times. I think sometimes they don't stop him because they don't want to appear like a bunch of bullies. And they have to make sure it's fair. Okay, so it's fair. Whatever. It's fair. Please let's move. Moving on. Hang on. John, I can't say your last name. Zoska. Okay. G, let's object to all the evidence. Yes. And when he said, do you remember when he said, this is distracting? You know, having the one piece of the report from the speed trooper person who did that analysis. This is distracting. Yeah. Like the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain, you know, at all this evidence. Oh my God. So true. So true. Okay, here you go again, John. It must be hard going through life with your head up your butt. He doesn't think it is, though. He really thinks his perception of reality is reality. I actually dated somebody like that. And somebody asked me if he was a liar. And I'm like, no, he's not a liar. He's not a liar. He actually believes all of that as being true. He's reinvented it in his head. He can't handle the fact that, you know, one little mistake, like, handle it. You're making mistakes. He's in a tailspin. Yeah, you said that too. This whole thing is where he starts getting into a tailspin. So I know we're up for, you know, the next couple. I know one of my links isn't working right. I'm going to work on that. 100% can't guarantee you can get a hold of me on my other social medias. I'm not perfect at that, so please be patient. As I understand it's happening, I'll work on and get somebody to help me out with it. They have to be the right price. That would be $0. Okay. I still haven't received my first paycheck yet. Yeah, I can't even give $12 to my grandson. Unbelievable. Okay. All right, let's see. Where are we now? I'm going to go. I think we're going to come right into the next person. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play right where we are.
You may. Statement called next witness.
It's going to call Dr. A.D. Shield.
Yeah, this one's going to be heavy. Here's our skip back again.
No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You may step down.
You step down.
You may. Statement called next witness.
It's going to call Dr. A.D. Shield.
right, good afternoon, Dr. Shield. If you would please make your way to the witness stand, which is to my right, up one riser. When you get there, please remain standing, raise your right hand, and my clerk, Teresa, who's on my left, will swear you in.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please be seated. First thing I will ask you to do is to state your first and last names for the record and spell each, please.
Amy Shield, AMYSHEIL.
Thank you. Go ahead, your witness.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Dr. Shield. How are you currently employed?
I'm an associate medical examiner at the Waukesha County Medical Examiner's Office.
How long have you been with the medical examiner's office?
About 7.5 years.
What are your duties at the medical examiner's office?
My primary function is to determine cause and manner of death, and in order to do that, I often perform autopsies or external examinations, send out laboratory tests, interpret the results of those tests, compile all this information into a report, and then certify a death certificate.
And is that report, what is that report called?
An autopsy protocol or autopsy report.
Can you briefly describe to the jury the schooling and training you went through to become an associate medical examiner?
Yes, I earned my Doctor of Medicine degree from Creighton University in Nebraska in 2003, and then I completed a pathology residency in South Carolina. That is anatomic and clinical pathology. And then I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship, which concerns how disease and injury cause death. Then I practiced for about a year as a forensic pathologist in South Carolina. And then I did an additional year of training in pediatric pathology, which is the study of diseases and conditions in infants and children. I worked in pediatric pathology in an academic setting for about 5 years before coming to Waukesha County.
I'm going to direct your attention to approximately November 22nd of 2021. Did you perform an external examination of an individual identified as Leanna Owen?
Yes.
I did give you 3 exhibits when you walked into court, is that correct?
Yes.
I'm going to direct your attention to exhibit number 62. Do you see that in front of you?
Yes.
Is that the autopsy protocol for Leanna Owen?
Yes.
And can you just state for the record how many pages that autopsy protocol consists of?
It's not on the screen.
And it's not going to be on the screen.
Previously provided to Mr. Brooks.
Yes.
Do you have any additional copies today? Any chance?
I do not. We can make some.
You don't have that in your materials, sir?
Of course he
Do you
does.
have the autopsy protocol in your materials?
No.
Oh, yeah, yes, he does. Yes, he does.
You can provide that to Madam Clerk and we can make copies
He
as well.
totally does. Objection, I don't have it. You have the piece of paper.
Was it intended for me to have or not to have? Just so I'm clear.
Of course it's
can't
intended
answer
for you
that.
to have. It's part of the discovery. Probably in those boxes there, you big dummy.
Provided to the defense.
Those boxes are for you to read, not for you to fill the
All right,
fork.
we'll still make
I
copies.
haven't even done that yet. Carry around and complain about all the work you have to do. It's so hard. You've no fear. Oh my god.
next door and copy
Except for
them.
value and return for value is a worthless, useless statement.
Do you have Exhibit 62,
Means
sir?
nothing.
It'd be the autopsy protocol for Leanna Owen.
I accept for value and return for value these documents shown.
The record to reflect that the defendant has a copy of Exhibit 62. Please continue, Attorney Crazy.
Ma'am, what did you do in this case in terms of examinations of Ms. Owen?
On November,
Generally speaking, I'm sorry.
on November 22nd, I performed her external examination, which involves documentation of all her clothing and jewelry, her identifying features such as stature, body weight, hair color, eye color, any scars, tattoos, and then we proceed with documentation of injuries.
And did you also create a summary of the injuries that you located on Ms. Owen?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to show for you on the screen in front of you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 163. If you can tell me when you can see that on the screen in front of you. And I did provide Mr. Brooks a copy of both the autopsy protocol as well as the diagram that's going to show on the screen.
It's into being called that name, Your Honor, for the record.
Because you're not paying attention to me directly, so I have to say something stupid and ignorant. By the way,
Is it showing up?
that's what I did when I was looking down here. I looked up, except, I know I've done this before, but I looked up except for value and return for value statement. There's a lot of stuff that goes directly to him because I don't think he's using it other than to just draw attention to himself. He thinks if he does that over and over again, even though it's meaningless to him, because he's not really sovereign, he doesn't really buy into this, that it's going to do something for the jury. But here on some random website, in the financial arena, it describes the act of accepting a debt or obligation as payment. So he accepts that paper as payment and goods of services and then returning it for the equivalent. So it's meaningless. It's sav-sit. It's a sav-sit phrase. It's taken out of context. Obviously something civil, because if they're talking about value, we're not talking about value here. This isn't a monetary exchange. He committed a criminal act, and they're trying to prove that he committed the criminal act, period, end of story. Not that they're having a lot of difficulty here. But, okay, moving on. This is going to be a hard one, by the
In front of
way.
your screen. And Exhibit 163, is that the diagram that you prepared to summarize your findings in the autopsy protocol for Leanna Owen?
Yes.
And does it accurately depict the injuries that are notated or described in the autopsy protocol?
Yes.
I would ask the court to accept Exhibit 62 and 163 into evidence.
Objection.
Okay. I'm actually not even mad about this objection. He should be objecting to the evidence going in. He doesn't really have any kind of basis for that in any kind of reality other than it's devastating to his case. You know, reminiscent of Liar Liar, but you know, he should be, and a good lawyer would object to have most of these things, I guess, entered.
The objection to both, each objection is noted. They're overruled. Exhibits 62 and 163 are both received permission to publish. Or I believe only 163 is what you asked me for, is granted.
Yeah, it was only one asked for.
Okay, shut
Permission
up.
to publish 163. That's what I said.
Thank you. Ma'am, can you briefly describe what this document, Exhibit 163, portrays?
Before she answers, that's a lot of injury, and my screen is not fancy, but that's the largest bone in the body, hardest bone to fracture, and we'll get to that again when he fractures a child's femur and what happens to that child. Um, it isn't Jackson Sparks. His is going to be addressed here. There's a spinal fracture here for this lady. This is also an extremely hard area to break. It's very protected by a lot of musculature and, you know, for me, a lot of fat, but whatever. So here's her skull fracture. That is significant. It's the injury underneath is significant, so it was probably a depressed skull fracture. It says, I don't know, it just says nasal and skull. So, and spinal, I'm not sure what that says, but if that's a fracture, that's, you know, he basically decapitated her. I'm sorry for being so graphic. Let's see what she has to say. Let's see what the
This
expert
diagram
has to say.
depicts Leanna Owen's injuries. The red represents open wounds, lacerations or abrasions, which are scrapes to the skin. Blue is for bruising or contusions. Black is internal injuries or skeletal fractures.
And in doing performing
sternum
the
too.
autopsy procedure on Miss Owen,
Here.
were there any? What was the cause of her death?
Multiple blunt force traumatic injuries.
Specifically for the injuries that she sustained, can you describe the fatal injuries for the jury?
Objection, leading witness.
Overruled. She may answer.
Leanna Owen had injuries to her head, spine, torso, and viscera, or her internal organs. The combination of all these injuries led to her death, but she did sustain isolated injuries to her upper cervical spine, or her neck spine, and aortic lacerations. The aorta is the largest artery in the body. That would have been fatal within seconds to a couple of minutes.
Okay, so let's slow that down a little bit. Not to be too graphic, but basically all of the injuries together are the cause of death in her case. However, if you think about some of the individual injuries, the injury to her upper neck or head, basically when you break the first vertebrae, it's broken away from the skull. It's almost, and in some cases, I don't know how serious hers was, but can be termed an internal decapitation where, you know, the rest of the neck is intact, but the head is separated from the neck. That's a fatal injury. I've only ever heard, and I've never seen, of one of those injuries not being fatal. It was with a child in California who the door came open on the car and he was hanging from the strap of the seatbelt, and it internally decapitated him, and he actually survived. So that wasn't a blunt trauma. That was like some sort of weird trauma to him. But needless to say, the injury is generally what we term, you know, a dirty dozen, which is injuries that will kill you immediately. To have your aorta insulted by a trauma, meaning he hit her at such a high speed that something completely protected by the chest muscles, in her case, probably a good deal of tissue on top of that, the bones of the chest, which is the rib cage that protects your heart, and all of the viscera and fascia that hold that all in place inside is built to protect the most important piece, which is your heart. He hit her hard enough that it insulted the most interior protected piece, which then, of course, she did probably expire within seconds, if not sooner, because of all of the blood loss. That would have been immediate blood loss. That's, you know, your heart is beating out a good deal of blood, and 1, 2, 3 heartbeats, it could be enough to really have a problem. So those specifically two are enough. That's enough.
And would
That's
all
enough
those injuries be
details.
consistent with being struck by a moving SUV weighing approximately 3,300 pounds?
And I'm
Objection,
not nearly as
hearsay.
smart as she is.
Overruled. You may answer.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'm next going to direct your attention to, did you perform an autopsy on an individual identified as Virginia Sorenson?
Yes.
And do you have her autopsy protocol in front of you, Exhibit 63?
Yes.
And do you have a diagram detailing Miss Sorenson's injuries on in Exhibit 164? Oh,
I don't have a diagram.
you do not have a diagram.
And once again, this is 164.
That is correct.
All right, thank you.
Do you see it in front of you?
Yes.
Do the does the documentation in Exhibit 164, is that a summary
Look at his
of
stupid
your findings
face.
from the autopsy protocol for Ms. Sorenson?
Yes.
I would ask the court to admit Exhibits 164 and 63 and publish 164.
Objection.
Obviously, 164 is on the screen. Has Exhibit 63, the copy, been provided to Mr. Brooks?
Correct. The autopsy protocol for Virginia Sorenson as well as the diagram contained in 164 have both been provided to Mr. Brooks.
Objection. I don't consent to that name, nor do I agree to it.
Oh. All right.
Just-
Exhibits 6.
Read the room. Stupid. Read the room. Okay, she's a professional and she is a very smart person. You know, and dealing with these things every day, I think a large part of what these people can tell themselves is they're really working for the living. They're the voice of the person who was killed, but they're really working for the living. A lot of times what she does is she finds out for the family, you know, why their loved one died if they didn't know of some of these medical problems. This, you know, she's doing a very good job and she's being very professional, but any person who handled so many people who lost their lives all at once in this kind of tragedy, those emotions have to flow through and meet. I had a little boy who basically his family thought he was perfectly healthy. He had been doing this 1-mile run from the gas station downtown to a little fire station. We gave him ice cream at the end, and then we're called in the middle of it to go to the middle of the parade. The poor little kid basically dropped dead. They had no idea of any. He had been doing this for a couple of years with his family where they jog down the street and go get some ice cream for at least a year, maybe even 2. He was 5-6 years old. The family had no idea that there was some kind of congenital cardiac problem until that point. And these people, these professionals, they're the ones who take those bodies, sometimes little ones, and make it clear to the family so that they can move on. It wasn't their fault. But I remember talking to the mom that night, and she said, he told me he didn't feel good, and I made him go on, and I was like, you didn't do anything wrong. And it starts with somebody like me, but it ends with somebody like her saying, there's no way you could have known. There was no way you could have known. But even I cry about that little boy years later because I remember it, and it's so sad. But at the time, I just keep a straight face, and I was like, you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything I wouldn't have done. Any other parent would have done. You are attentive. You were having a good time. There's nothing you did wrong. And I don't know. remember, she's a person. She's not just a professional.
And 164 are both received. Permission to publish 164 is granted.
Thank you. Let me know when you see it in the screen in front of you.
Yes.
Okay. Again, ma'am, the injuries that are detailed in Exhibit 164 that's showing on the screen, was that exhibit created as a result of your findings in the autopsy protocol for Ms.
They are very similar. Okay. Meaning, okay, so these women were going forward. He hit them from behind. So she doesn't have, it doesn't look like she's got the lower spinal fracture, but she's got something down here. She's got the upper spinal fracture here as well. A lot of the same injuries. She does have a femur fracture on the same side as the other lady. The same sternal. I imagine these are going to be very similar.
Sorenson.
Yes.
And can you describe for the jury what injuries you discovered? Well, first of all, strike that. Did you perform an external and an internal examination of Ms. Sorenson?
Objection. Reading the witness.
Overruled. She may answer.
Yes.
When did you perform those?
November 22nd, 2021.
And during the autopsy, what injuries did you discover on Ms. Sorenson?
Virginia Sorenson had blunt trauma to her head, neck, torso, and right leg.
Were you able to determine a cause of death for Ms. Sorenson?
Yes, multiple blunt force traumatic injuries.
And can you describe for the jury which injuries were fatal injuries?
Virginia
Objection. Reading the
Sorenson.
witness.
Overruled.
Virginia Sorenson also had a high cervical spine injury with laceration of her brainstem. She also had lacerations to her heart, either of which would have been fatal.
So very similar. Laceration to the heart would open or possibly cause bleeding into the peritoneal space, causing a cardiac tamponade. In other words, the sac around the heart fills up, the heart can no longer beat. That's a dirty dozen. We are not capable in most places of doing the procedure that saves that person's life, which is a pericardial centesis. I do know how to do one. I have done one on a cadaver, but I've never done one in the field. It's not approved in my jurisdiction. So, you know, if that's your problem, and even if I know it is, the only thing I can do is hurry up. And it's not always useful or fruitful. But yes, it's one of the dirty dozen.
And is that consistent with being struck by a moving SUV weighing approximately 3,300 pounds?
Objection. Hearsay.
Overruled.
Yes.
He's such a horrible person. What a horrible little man. But he's so little, too. I think he's so big, but he's so...
Finally, Dr. Shield, did you perform an autopsy on Jackson Sparks?
Yes.
And did you create an autopsy protocol after your examinations of Jackson Sparks?
Yes.
And did you perform, or did you create a diagram which displayed the injuries on Jackson Sparks?
Yes.
Do you have in front of you Exhibit 64, which is an autopsy protocol for Jackson Sparks?
Yes.
And I'm going to display what's been marked as States Exhibit 165
This is where she's starting to get a little shaky, and that's totally understandable. This is a child.
on the screen in front of you.
Objection. I'm confused. The 64 or
They reference both.
oh, okay.
64 is the protocol, 165 is the diagram.
Okay. I was a little confused.
And for the record, the state did provide Mr. Brooks with a autopsy protocol for Jackson Sparks, as well as a copy of Exhibit 165, which is the diagram. Ma'am,
Objection. I do not consent to that name, nor do I know that individual. for the record.
Shut
Please
up.
continue.
Nor do
Thank
you
you.
need to.
Ma'am, does Exhibit 165, the diagram in front of you, accurately show the findings that you made during the autopsy of Jackson Sparks?
Yes.
Okay. I would ask the court to admit State's Exhibit 64 as well as State's Exhibit 165 into
Objection.
evidence and publish Exhibit 165.
Objection.
All right, stupid objections. We're going to ignore that. I'm going to warn you right now. This is going to be probably a diagram with a child's figure on it. So if you want to like skip through, I don't know how far in advance you're going to need to, but at least a couple of minutes.
Overruled. Exhibit 64 is received. Exhibit 165 is received. Permission to publish is granted.
Thank you. And Exhibit 165 is the diagram that you took, which
Right. Rib fractures. Occipital. Okay, so he definitely was in. Oh my goodness. His skull was separated from his neck. He had a skull fracture. They've got a circle around it, so I'm guessing this would be a depressed skull fracture. Basilar skull fractures are at the bottom of your skull, where it's kind of on the inside almost, but right underneath and inside and surrounds where your spine goes in. So when his brain swelled, it probably, there's no place for your brain to swell, so it probably went down into his spinal cord. These rib fractures are probably may, in a small child, puncture the lung. These are devastating injuries.
displays the findings that you made in your autopsy protocol.
Yes.
Can you describe for the jury the injuries that you observed? Strike that. When did you do your external and internal examination of Jackson?
November 27, 2021.
Why was that later than the others?
Jackson went to the hospital. He was pronounced brain dead on November 23rd.
And again, is there any reason why it would take till the 27th to perform the autopsy?
Objection.
Okay, so let's go over a couple of things. First of all, trauma in a child, different from the trauma. It's not as likely for even trauma in adults to not be transported. We're going to transport if we think that there's something the surgeons can do. Okay, in the two ladies, they probably bled out extremely quickly, and that's why there's no plus the whole resource thing. They're going to want to use resources for Jackson over somebody who bleeds out, because you can't put blood inside the body that quickly. We don't carry blood products on an ambulance generally, unless it's a critical care ambulance and it's specific to the patient. So in other words, we need to know ahead of time what blood type they are. And that needs to be confirmed. You can't just give, a blood product to a person without a lot of blood testing going on first. So it's not just automatic. We're not the military services. We don't have that kind of resources. We don't keep that kind of information on every single individual. So it's not a feasible, easy thing to move to. Have we all wanted to? Of course. We want blood products. We want blood expanders instead of just fluid. We're just making Kool-Aid out of your blood. We know these things, but there's so many other precautionary things that cause, and then privacy things that cause us not to be able to do these things. That it's a lot more complicated than you think. But in the case of a child, and in a case of a lot of adults, I'm going to transport a trauma case because I am not a trauma surgeon and I can't open them up on scene and see. So even if I have somebody with a depressed skull fracture, even if I have somebody with a devastating injury, if I can keep their heart going, and if it's a child, period, they're going. they're going to get transported. So Jackson got transported. It's automatic. They were able to keep his heart and lungs going because that's not as complicated, especially for a hospital, as you think. They do all kinds of really amazing things. So we thought we were bringing in people who no way were going to make it, and they've done things like ECMO, which is basically a heart-lung bypass, and saved the person. Like, that's incredible. The things they can do today are incredible. But we leave that up to the hospital. The other thing that does is it gives the family time to collect and start that mourning process, which is so very important. A lot of the reason why I would not separate parents from a child that I'm doing CPR on is I want them to see what's going on. And people think, well, they're going to panic. Yes, of course they do. But a lot of times if you give them something to do, like, please write down their allergies, please write down their birth date for me, please write down these things for me that you can do effortlessly, that's going to take me a lot of effort so that I can spend time on this. And that gives them something to do that makes them and helps them feel like they're actually participating. And they are. Because without that information to get their child registered at the hospital, there's nothing. It just slows everything down. So that is important stuff to do. Very easy, and it gets them involved. She's also going to explain possibly organ donation, definitely an honor walk. And we'll go into let's see what really did happen with little Jackson.
He was
Hold on.
Oh, sorry.
Overruled. You may answer.
Thank you.
Jackson was in the hospital. He became an organ donor, which often requires a couple of extra days.
Even if you are an organ donor, if you die outside of the hospital, many times by the time you're found and brought in, your organs are not viable for donation any longer. But as Jackson was brought into the hospital, oxygenation was provided throughout the problem. He was stabilized cardiovascularly to continue to provide oxygen to those organs. I mean, that makes a big difference. So if you find somebody like who's an organ donor and even a couple of hours have passed, they're probably not viable, or at least a lot of the organs aren't viable. Sometimes skin and eyes and stuff, but not heart, lung, or some of the things that need oxygen more. So that would take a couple of days. They send out on the organ donation site all of the information. The organ donor people come in, which I've known a lot of people who do that as part-time work if they're somebody like me, because they're qualified emergency drivers, which means they can have lights on, take things to airports and things like that, or to other local hospitals if that's the case. Then Jackson would have gotten an honor walk. And I know I've described it before, and it makes me tear up every time. But an honor walk is when the patient who is donating is walked from their room to the surgical suite. And many times, and every time, people line the hallways, and it's the medical staff. It could be medical staff that wasn't even directly involved. We come from the fire department. Sometimes police will come. Obviously, family is there. They line the hallways and they honor the person who's being walked to the surgical suite to donate their organs and save other lives. That's an honor walk. Okay. And then after that, she would have gotten little Jackson to do an autopsy, which would have been required by law due to the circumstances.
Can you describe for the jury his injuries?
I might have to pause.
Jackson had bruising around both of his eyes. He had a large bruise to the left side of his forehead. He had undergone a craniectomy where the neurosurgeon removes a portion of the skull to relieve pressure on the brain from brain swelling. That's the large oval depicted on the left side of the skull in the diagram. He had trauma to his brain. He had bleeding around his brain inside his skull. He had multiple bruises to his brain. He also had a separation of his skull from his cervical spine. And he had 2 rib fractures on the right side.
What was his cause of death?
Complications of craniocerebral injuries due to blunt force trauma to head.
And what injuries of those were fatal?
His head injuries.
Okay, let's take a minute. I don't know if I can do this.
And would that be consistent with it being struck by a moving SUV weighing approximately 3,300 pounds?
Yes.
Objection, hearsay.
Nothing further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Now we gotta hear it's stupid. I am 100% sure this is gonna make me angry. I know I probably skipped a lot of this when it came out at first because you see me now, I'm a blubbering fool. That to me is just, those are devastating injuries, and pulling it all in with, you know, he was right next to his brother when it happened. His brother was also very seriously injured, to a large extent, very similar injuries, just not as, he was larger, probably a little bit stronger, probably not hit as head on as, or back on as little Jackson. But I know his brother reports having some survivor guilt, like he should have helped his brother in. And that's just devastating to me because it's not his fault. And he's got a little angel who's going to be with him all the time.
Cross-exam.
Okay, let's.
1 second.
Oh, God. Got to get everybody's attention on you. She is disgusted. So is he. Look at Zach with Chow. Daryl, you are so disgusting. That behavior is not making anybody think that you care at all, especially when you start asking what's likely to be the stupidest questions of the whole trial. But let's see. Oh, I'm so emotional. Oh, God. Yes, you did that, Daryl. Oh, God, we should have been able to get hecklers into this thing.
Your cross, please. Do you have any questions for this witness?
Do not think for 1 minute that this has anything to do with the fact that the description of even those 3 people who aren't the extent of the fatal injuries that he caused is what's causing his response now. This is 100% Academy Award winning BS.
Just 1 second. I apologize to the court for taking so long. Do you know why the decision was made to why the decision was made for Jackson to become an organ donor?
Sustained.
Thank you. God, what a question. And why would she know? She's not the family.
Did you end up doing any more autopsies beside those 3?
As it relates to this case or some other case, sir?
This case.
This case.
To this case.
Did you hear the question?
Could he please repeat it?
Please repeat your question.
You know what? Honestly, you do need to ask her some questions. And behaving like Eeyore, the donkey clown here from Winnie the Pooh, is not winning you any points whatsoever. Okay? God. The evil donkey.
As far as this case.
Oh my God. That's not the full question. She wants the question.
Those the only 3 autopsies that you did.
Yes, Jackson Sparks, Virginia Sorenson, and Leanna Owen.
Oh, yes, she is a queen. Say their names. They were people. They are people. Oh my God. Oh, God. Let's get back to stupid, evil Eeyore. Come on, evil Eeyore, let's go.
Can you recall when recall when they were brought to the hospital?
Okay, Daryl, man up, okay? A good attorney would ask succinct questions or none for this person. Why would she know when or if or whatever? You know, she's going to know how they came, if they came directly to her or if they were in the hospital and came to her. He was in the hospital right after you ran over him in the parade when he was just trying to hand out candy and stuff.
Virginia Sorenson and Leanna Owens were pronounced at the scene. Jackson Sparks was transported to the hospital.
I'm assuming that's WAUKESHA Memorial.
No.
He was transferred to Children's Hospital of Wisconsin.
Even if it was a further away hospital, it was the closest appropriate hospital. Plus, because of the number of injured and sick, a coordinator on scene or a transport coordinator in charge would have been a lieutenant or a chief, would have been in contact with the hospitals, saying how many people they had, what level of injury, whether it was a priority 1, 2, 3, or totally critical like his, and they would have decided between that person and the hospital. It even takes it out of the hands of the paramedic, where we would be told which hospital is appropriate for our patient, and that's how that works. But what difference does it make? Children always have a higher level of care hospital. We try to get them there.
Upon first tending to the victims, were you in the knowledge of what happened?
It's actually not a bad question.
Yes.
That information would go to her because a full report from the hospital, if there is one, and or EMS on site, or an examiner called on site by the police directly. So there's several ways it can happen. For example, if I go into a place and I find somebody who's deceased and it's unwitnessed, the police are called. The police call a medical examiner person directly. They make a report. Then it goes for an autopsy because it's an unwitnessed death. In this case, EMS report, the hospital, likely the organ donation information, because there's going to be organs that are not present in the body any longer when they go to her. So she's going to have a full reporting of exactly everything, all of that. It's part of how she determines how someone died. Stupid.
And that knowledge was given to you immediately?
I don't understand what that means. Immediately.
Could you
what?
please repeat?
That knowledge was given to you immediately when you were called to tend to him?
Yes.
Making an idiot out of himself, even more than usual.
Were you called to attend to any other victims of the incident?
You already asked that,
Or just
stupid.
the 3?
You already asked that.
Jackson Sparks, Virginia Sorenson, and Leanna Owens.
And the queen did it again. Say their names out loud for the stupid repetitive questions.
You didn't to anyone else?
Oh my God, that's the third time. Thank you.
Browns.
Oh, overruled. She may answer.
No.
No further questions.
Thank you. Any redirect? I think you, Dr.
Mercifully. I know this, I don't think this was a very long one, but I'm gonna, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna take a break. Evil Eeyore and his stupid questions. Let's see who's next. Oh, they take a break too. I think this is the other. Okay, we're gonna do this in 2 separate ones. Okay. Thank you so much for joining me. Like, subscribe, and comment, please. I'm sure we're gonna get a lot of comments on this one because, God, his stupid behavior. What do you think of his dumb behavior? Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. All right. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Patty Jo.